Have you ever been in that spot where you're told to add a huge new feature, but it's for some old, fragile code that you are absolutely forbidden from changing? It feels impossible, right? Well, today we're going to look at a really clever design pattern that lets you do exactly that. It's called the visitor pattern, and it's all about adding new functionality to stable, complex code without breaking a single thing.
All right, so let's dive into this with a scenario that I am sure is going to feel all too familiar for some of you.
So, picture this. You've just been handed a big task. Management wants a brand new feature, and they want it now. But it has to be added to this incredibly complex, business-critical application that's already live, out in production, and working just fine. The pressure is on, and the number one rule is, do not break anything. Now, to make this concrete, let's say your app deals with this massive, interconnected graph of geographic data. You've got nodes in this graph, that could be a city or an industry, a sightseeing spot, you name it. And your job? You need to add a new feature to export this entire, complicated structure into a clean XML file. Seems straightforward enough, right? Well, here's the catch. You go to your architect, all ready to add your new methods, and they just put up a wall, a flat no. They argue, look, this code is in production, it's stable, and jamming in new XML export methods directly into these core classes is just way too risky. One little bug could ripple out and bring the whole system crashing down. So, how in the world do you add this new XML export behavior without actually touching the code you're not allowed to touch? Well, the solution is surprisingly elegant, and it kind of helps to think of it like an insurance agent. And this, my friends, is where the visitor pattern makes its grand entrance. Its whole purpose in life is to let you take an algorithm, like our XML export logic, and completely separate it from the objects it needs to work on, like all those geographic nodes. The operation literally becomes its own separate thing. Think about it this way, right? An insurance agent's job is to sell insurance. They don't own the buildings they go to, they just visit them. And when they show up, they perform a very specific action based on the building's type. They'll offer medical insurance if it's a house, theft insurance if it's a bank, and fire insurance for a coffee shop. See? The agent is the new operation, and the buildings are the existing objects that haven't changed at all. And that is the absolute core idea here. Instead of cramming our XML export logic into our already jam-packed city and industry classes, we take that new behavior and we put it in its own separate class called a visitor. In our case, it'd be something like an XML export visitor. Okay, now for the really clever part. How do we get our original untouched node objects to work with our new visitor class? I mean, we could just write a giant, ugly if-else block to check the type of every single node, but that's a maintenance nightmare waiting to happen. The visitor pattern has a much, much smarter solution. I mean, just look at the difference here. On the left, you've got this horrible chain of conditional checks. You're constantly asking, hey, are you a city? Are you an industry? It's brittle and awful to read. But on the right, with the visitor pattern, it's just one single beautiful line of code, node.acceptVisitor. That's it. So much cleaner. And this magic is possible because of a trick called double dispatch. It sounds complicated, but it's not. There are just two dispatches, or calls, happening. First, our code calls the accept method on the node. That's dispatch number one. Then, and this is the key, the node itself, which knows its own concrete type, maybe it's a city, immediately turns around and calls the specific do-for-city method on the visitor, handing itself over. That's the second dispatch. The object tells the visitor which method to run. No more if-else. Okay, let's zoom out a little and look at the formal structure to see how all these pieces actually fit together in our code. So this blueprint really shows the 5 key players that make this whole thing work. You have the visitor interface, which is like a contract, listing all the operations a visitor can do. Then you have a concrete visitor, like our XML export visitor, that actually does the work. On the other side, you've got the element interface, which just guarantees that every object has an accept method. And then our concrete element, our city or industry class, implements that method. Finally, the client is just the bit of code that kicks the whole thing off by creating a visitor and passing it to an element. So this all sounds pretty powerful, right? But it's not a silver bullet. It's not the right tool for every single job. So when should you actually use this pattern? Let's weigh the trade-offs. The pros here are huge. You stick perfectly to the open/closed principle. And that's not just some academic term. It means you can add new behaviors with new visitors, but your core classes stay closed for modification. This is exactly what our architect was worried about. It massively reduces the risk of introducing bugs into a stable system. But, and this is a big but, there's a major downside. If you need to add a new type of node, say a river class, you have to go back and update every single visitor you've ever written to handle it. And that can be a real maintenance headache. So this brings us to the real takeaway. The visitor pattern absolutely shines when you have a stable set of classes that don't change very often, but you expect that you'll need to add a lot of new operations to them over time. It is the perfect tool for walking through a complex object structure, like a tree, and applying some external logic without ever modifying the structure itself. So the next time you're staring down a stable but really complex system, think about the visitor. It's such a powerful tool for adding new tricks to old code without risking a catastrophe. So I'll leave you with this question. What operation in your own projects right now could you pull out into a visitor? It's definitely something to think about.